I was standing on my front porch, watching the snow fall on my Christmas lights, when Patricia Henderson from the HOA pulled into my driveway like she owned the place. My name is Henry Fletcher, and I had just spent the entire morning stringing up lights across my roof, which was no easy task given the 3 feet of snow that had fallen overnight. The lights looked perfect, creating a warm golden glow against the white blanket covering everything in sight. I felt pretty good about myself until I saw Patricia's face. She stepped out of her silver Mercedes, her designer boots immediately sinking into the snow. I could see the annoyance on her face as she trudged toward me, clutching a leather folder against her chest. Patricia was the president of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA, and she took her job more seriously than most federal judges I knew. Her perfectly styled blonde hair did not move an inch despite the winter wind, and her red lipstick was so bright it could probably be seen from space. "Mr. Fletcher," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the howling wind, "we need to talk about your Christmas display." I wiped some snow off my jacket and walked down the steps to meet her halfway. "What about it? I just put it up this morning." She opened her folder with practiced efficiency, pulling out several printed pages that were already decorated with yellow sticky notes. "Your Christmas lights are in direct violation of Pine Ridge Estates HOA regulations, Section 12, Subsection 4, Paragraph 3. Christmas decorations must be installed no later than November 30th, and it is now December 15th. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline that never came. "Patricia, we had a massive blizzard. The entire county was shut down for a week. I could not physically get on my roof until today. The rules do not make exceptions for weather," she said, flipping through her papers. "Additionally, your light display extends beyond the approved roofline boundaries by approximately 6 inches on the eastern corner of your home." 6 inches, I repeated slowly, feeling my patience starting to wear thin. 6.3 inches to be exact. I measured. She pulled out a small measuring tape from her pocket as if that proved anything. "The fine is $500 for the late installation, and an additional $300 for the boundary violation. Payment is due within 10 business days, or we will place a lien on your property." The snow was falling heavier now, and I could feel the cold seeping through my jacket. I had been up since 5 in the morning, carefully navigating icy shingles and frozen gutters to make my house look festive for the holidays. My wife Sarah had passed away 2 years ago, and this was the first Christmas I had felt motivated enough to even attempt decorating. The lights were not just decorations. They were my way of honoring her memory. She loved Christmas more than anyone I had ever known. "Patricia, I understand you have rules to enforce, but this is ridiculous." The entire neighborhood was buried under snow. My driveway was not even plowed until yesterday. She snapped her folder shut with a decisive thud. "Mr. Fletcher, if we make exceptions for you, we will have to make exceptions for everyone. The HOA board voted unanimously on this matter last night after Mrs. Carmichael reported your violation." Of course, Deborah Carmichael, the 70-year-old busybody who lived 3 doors down and spent her days watching the neighborhood through binoculars. I should have known she would be involved. "I will tell you what," I said, crossing my arms. "I am not paying those fines. They are unreasonable, and any court would agree with me." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Then we will see you at the next HOA board meeting, which is tomorrow night at 7. Until this matter is resolved, you are in violation, and additional daily fines of $50 will accrue starting tomorrow." She turned on her heel and marched back to her Mercedes, leaving deep footprints in the snow. I watched her drive away, feeling a mixture of anger and disbelief. This was exactly the kind of petty nonsense that made HOAs unbearable. I had lived in Pine Ridge Estates for 15 years, always paid my dues on time, kept my lawn immaculate, and never caused problems. And now I was being fined $800 because I dared to hang Christmas lights during a blizzard. I went back inside my house, stomping the snow off my boots in the entryway. The warmth of the fireplace welcomed me, and I could see my lights twinkling through the front window. They really did look good. Sarah would have loved them. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at my kitchen table, pulling out my phone. My first call was to my neighbor, Marcus Chen, who lived 2 houses down. Marcus was a real estate attorney and had been dealing with HOA issues for years. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Henry, what is up?" "Patricia Henderson just hit me with an $800 fine for my Christmas lights." There was a pause, then a long sigh. "Let me guess. Late installation and boundary violation. How did you know?" "Because she did the same thing to the Robinsons last year." Different excuse, same pattern. She is trying to establish precedent for strict enforcement. The HOA board is planning to raise dues next year, and they want to show they are tough on violations to justify it. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. Can they actually do this? Legally, it depends. HOA rules are binding, but they have to be reasonable. The problem is fighting them costs time and money. Most people just pay the fine and move on. "I am not most people," I said. Marcus laughed. "No, you are definitely not." "Listen, the board meeting is tomorrow night, right? I will come with you. We can argue that emergency weather conditions constitute force majeure, which would make their late installation penalty unenforceable." "I appreciate that, Marcus, but I think I have a better approach." After we hung up, I sat there staring at my coffee, thinking about Patricia's smug expression when she had handed me those papers. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I was not just some random homeowner she could push around. I was Henry Fletcher, the fire marshal for the entire county. And if Patricia wanted to play hardball about code violations, I was more than happy to oblige. I spent the rest of that day doing something I rarely did. I pulled up the public records for every property in Pine Ridge Estates, focusing specifically on the HOA board members' homes. As fire marshal, I had access to building permits, inspection records, and code violation reports. What I found was enlightening, to say the least. Patricia Henderson's house, for example, had an unpermitted addition built onto her garage 5 years ago. The structure had never been inspected and was not up to current fire codes. Deborah Carmichael had a wood-burning fireplace that had not been cleaned or inspected in over 6 years, which was a massive fire hazard. And the HOA vice president, Ronald Martinez, had converted his garage into a workshop without proper ventilation or fire suppression systems. I made notes, printed documents, and prepared my case. I was not planning to use this information to threaten anyone. That would be unethical and probably illegal. But I was definitely planning to educate the HOA board about the importance of following all codes and regulations, not just the ones that made them money. The next evening, I drove to the Pine Ridge Estates Community Center, where the HOA meetings were held. The snow had stopped, but the temperature had dropped to 15 degrees, and everything was covered in a thick layer of ice. The parking lot had been plowed, but someone had done a terrible job, leaving huge piles of snow blocking half the spaces. Inside, the community center was decorated with the blandest Christmas decorations I had ever seen. A small artificial tree sat in the corner, covered in white lights and silver ornaments. Everything was perfectly symmetrical and completely soulless. It was exactly what I expected from this HOA. About 20 residents were scattered around the room, sitting in folding chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. Patricia was in the center, flanked by Ronald Martinez and Deborah Carmichael. Two other board members I did not know well sat on the ends. Marcus had saved me a seat in the front row, and I sat down just as Patricia banged her gavel. "This meeting of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA board will now come to order," she announced. "First on our agenda, we have several code violation hearings. Mr. Henry Fletcher, please come forward." I stood and walked to the podium set up facing the board. Patricia looked down at me with barely concealed satisfaction. "Mr. Fletcher, you have been issued citations for late installation of Christmas decorations and boundary violations. The total fine is $800, with additional daily penalties accruing. Do you wish to contest these violations?" "I do," I said calmly. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that the violations are unreasonable given the emergency weather conditions that prevented any resident from safely installing decorations during the approved time frame. Furthermore, the 6-inch boundary violation is so minor as to be arbitrary and capricious." Deborah Carmichael leaned forward, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Mr. Fletcher, rules are rules. If we lived our lives making excuses for every little inconvenience, society would fall apart." "Mrs. Carmichael, a blizzard that shut down the entire county is not a little inconvenience," I replied. "It was a state of emergency declared by the governor. Essential services were suspended. But apparently, Christmas lights were supposed to take priority." Patricia tapped her pen on the table. "Mr. Fletcher, your sarcasm is noted but unhelpful. The board has reviewed your case and determined that the fines stand. If you wish to appeal, you may file a written request within 30 days, which will be reviewed at our next quarterly meeting in March." "March," I repeated. "So I would be paying daily fines for 3 months while waiting for you to maybe consider my appeal." "That is correct," Patricia said, her tone making it clear she was enjoying this. I took a deep breath, pulled out my own folder and set it on the podium. "Before we proceed, I think there are some other code violations we should discuss." Patricia frowned. "This hearing is specifically about your violations, Mr. Fletcher. Other matters can be raised during the open forum portion of the meeting." "These matters are directly relevant," I said. "You see, I am the county fire marshal, and in reviewing the properties in this neighborhood, I have discovered numerous serious fire code violations, including several that pose immediate threats to public safety." The room went completely silent. Patricia's face went pale, then flushed red. Ronald Martinez looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Even Deborah Carmichael had stopped shuffling her papers. "What are you talking about?" Patricia asked, her voice tight. I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. "Let us start with your house, Patricia. Public records show that in 2020, you built a 400-square-foot addition onto your garage. However, there is no building permit on file, which means the structure was never inspected. Under County Fire Code Section 417, any structure over 100 square feet requires inspection to verify proper egress, smoke detectors, and fire separation from the main dwelling." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "That is private property. You cannot just go snooping around my house." "I did not snoop. This is public record information available to anyone, but especially to the fire marshal, whose job is to ensure public safety. The addition you built is a fire hazard, and unless you can provide proof of proper permitting and inspection, I will have to issue a formal violation notice. The fine for unpermitted construction is $1,000, with daily penalties of $100 until the violation is corrected." I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "Deborah, your fireplace has not been cleaned or inspected since 2019. Creosote buildup in chimneys is one of the leading causes of house fires in this county. The required inspection interval is every 2 years for actively used fireplaces. That is a $500 fine with a mandatory immediate cease-use order until inspection is completed. Deborah was clutching her pearls, literally. She looked horrified. "Ronald, your garage conversion is interesting. You installed several pieces of industrial equipment that generate heat and sparks, but I do not see any permits for electrical upgrades or fire suppression systems. That is a serious hazard, not just to you but to your neighbors. If a fire starts in that workshop, it could spread to adjacent properties before the fire department arrives. That is a $1,500 fine and an immediate cease operations order." Ronald stood up, his face purple with anger. "You cannot come in here and threaten us like this." "I am not threatening anyone," I said calmly. "I am doing my job. You see, when you decided to fine me $800 for hanging Christmas lights during a blizzard, you made it clear that code enforcement is a priority in this neighborhood. I agree. Code enforcement is important. So I am enforcing the codes that actually matter, the ones that prevent people from dying in fires." Patricia had regained some of her composure. "This is retaliation. You are abusing your position because you are angry about your fine." "No, Patricia, I am doing exactly what you are doing. I am enforcing rules and regulations without exception or consideration for individual circumstances. You told me that if you make exceptions for one person, you have to make exceptions for everyone. The same principle applies to fire codes. I cannot ignore violations just because you are on the HOA board." Marcus was grinning in his seat, clearly enjoying the show. Several other residents were whispering to each other, and I could hear someone trying to suppress laughter. I pulled out another document. "I also conducted a drive-through inspection of the common areas this afternoon. The community center we are sitting in right now has several violations. Your emergency exit signs are not properly illuminated. You have storage boxes blocking the rear emergency exit. And your fire extinguishers are 7 months overdue for inspection. That is a violation of commercial fire codes, and since the HOA operates this facility, you are liable. That is another $1,000 in fines, plus daily penalties until corrected." Patricia stood up, slamming her hands on the table. "This is outrageous. You cannot fine the HOA. I absolutely can. The HOA is a corporate entity that operates common facilities open to residents. That makes you subject to commercial fire codes. I have been lenient in the past because violations were minor and quickly corrected when pointed out. But if we are establishing a new standard of zero tolerance for code violations, then I am happy to enforce that standard equally." The room erupted into conversation. Residents were talking over each other, some angry, some amused, all surprised. Patricia was frantically whispering with Ronald and Deborah, while the other 2 board members looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. I waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. "I have a proposal. You withdraw my fines, and I will work with the board members to correct their fire code violations without issuing formal penalties. We can call it a mutual understanding about reasonable enforcement during extenuating circumstances." Patricia looked like she wanted to explode, but Ronald put a hand on her arm. They had a brief, whispered argument before Patricia sat back down, her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. "The board will take a brief recess to discuss this matter," she said through gritted teeth. They got up and walked into a side room, closing the door behind them. The moment they were gone, the community center erupted into full conversation. Marcus came over and clapped me on the shoulder. "That was beautiful," he said. "I have never seen Patricia shut down like that." "I just want my Christmas lights up without harassment," I said. "But if they want to play games, I can play games too." An older man named George Wellington, who lived at the end of my street, came over. "Henry, I did not know you were the fire marshal." "I do not usually advertise it," I said. "I like to keep my work and personal life separate." "Well, I am glad you spoke up. This HOA has been out of control for years. Last summer they fined me $300 because my grass was half an inch too tall. I had been in the hospital for surgery, and they did not care." A younger woman named Jennifer Kim joined us. "They fined me for parking my car on the street overnight when my garage door broke. The repair company could not come until the next day, but the HOA did not care. They said street parking was prohibited except for guest parking with a permit, which takes 3 days to process." More and more residents started sharing their stories. It became clear that Patricia and her board had been ruling Pine Ridge Estates with an iron fist, using fines and threats to control every aspect of neighborhood life. Most people paid the fines because fighting them was too expensive and time-consuming. The HOA had essentially become a racket, generating revenue through aggressive enforcement of petty rules. After about 15 minutes, the board members filed back into the room. Patricia looked like she had aged 10 years. She sat down and picked up her gavel, but did not bang it. Instead, she took a deep breath and read from a prepared statement. "After careful consideration, the board has decided to withdraw the citations issued to Mr. Fletcher. Given the extraordinary weather circumstances, we acknowledge that enforcement of the installation deadline was not reasonable. Additionally, the boundary violation of 6 inches falls within acceptable tolerance levels and does not warrant penalty." There was a smattering of applause from the residents. Patricia held up her hand for silence. "However, we expect Mr. Fletcher to work with board members who may have inadvertent fire code issues to resolve them efficiently and without unnecessary penalties." "That was always my plan," I said. "I will schedule inspections with each of you this week and provide guidance on bringing everything up to code. Most of these issues can be resolved quickly and inexpensively if addressed promptly." Patricia nodded stiffly. "Then this matter is closed." "Mr. Fletcher, your record will show no violations." I gathered my papers and returned to my seat. Marcus was grinning ear to ear. "You just became a neighborhood legend," he whispered. The rest of the meeting proceeded with mundane HOA business, budgets, landscaping contracts, and upcoming events. But the atmosphere had changed. Residents were no longer intimidated. Several people raised concerns about other HOA rules, questioning whether they were reasonable or necessary. Patricia tried to maintain control, but her authority had been fundamentally undermined. After the meeting, I was stopped by at least a dozen residents who wanted to thank me or share their own HOA horror stories. I listened politely, but mostly I just wanted to go home and enjoy my Christmas lights. When I finally got back to my house, I stood in my driveway for a moment, looking at the display. The lights sparkled against the snow, casting a warm glow across the frozen landscape. It was exactly what Sarah would have wanted. She had always believed that Christmas was about bringing light into darkness, about making the world a little more beautiful and a little less cold. I went inside, made myself some hot chocolate, and sat by the window watching the lights. I felt good. Not because I had won some petty battle with the HOA, but because I had stood up for what was right. Rules were important, but they had to be applied with common sense and compassion. Patricia and her board had forgotten that, and they needed to be reminded. The next morning, I got a call from Ronald Martinez asking if I could come by his house to inspect the garage. I spent the next 3 days working with him, Patricia, and Deborah to identify and correct their fire code violations. Ronald needed to install a proper ventilation system and fire extinguisher in his workshop, which cost about $500. Patricia's garage addition required a retroactive permit and inspection, which involved some paperwork but no actual construction changes. Deborah hired a chimney sweep to clean her fireplace, which cost $200. In each case, I worked with them to find the most cost-effective solutions and expedited the paperwork. I did not enjoy making their lives difficult. I just wanted them to understand what it felt like to be on the receiving end of rigid, unforgiving enforcement. Word spread quickly through Pine Ridge Estates about what had happened. Several residents approached me asking for general fire safety inspections of their homes. I was happy to oblige, conducting free walkthroughs and providing advice on smoke detectors, fire extinguishers, and escape planning. It turned into an unexpected opportunity to actually make the neighborhood safer. About a week after the confrontation, I was outside adjusting one of my Christmas lights when a car pulled up. For a moment, I tensed, thinking Patricia was back for round two. But it was a vehicle I did not recognize, a blue Honda Accord. A woman got out, probably in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked familiar, but I could not place her. "Mr. Fletcher," she called out. "That is me," I said, climbing down from my ladder. She walked over and extended her hand. "I am Amanda Chen, Marcus's sister. He told me what you did at the HOA meeting." "Oh, right. Marcus mentioned you. You live over in Riverside Heights, do not you?" "I do. And I am also a reporter for the county newspaper. I would love to interview you about what happened." I hesitated. "I am not looking for attention, Amanda. I just wanted to put up my Christmas lights." "I understand, but what you exposed is important. HOA abuse is a real problem, and most people do not have the resources or knowledge to fight back. Your story could help others." I thought about all the residents who had shared their experiences with me, the fines they paid, the stress they endured, all because they were afraid to stand up to the board. Maybe Amanda was right. Maybe sharing what happened could make a difference. "Okay," I said. "But I want to focus on the bigger issue, not just my personal situation." We went inside, and I made coffee while Amanda set up her recorder. For the next hour, we talked about HOA governance, the balance between rules and reasonableness, and how concentrated power in neighborhood associations could lead to abuse. I shared some of the stories residents had told me, being careful not to use names without permission. Amanda was a good interviewer, asking thoughtful questions and really listening to the answers. She wanted to know about fire code enforcement too, how my job worked, and why those regulations existed. I explained that fire codes were written in blood, that every rule existed because someone had died in a preventable tragedy. That was why reasonable enforcement mattered. Codes that protected lives deserved strict adherence. Rules about Christmas light installation dates, not so much. The article came out 3 days later on the front page of the county section. The headline read, "Fire Marshal takes on HOA in Christmas light dispute, exposes code violations among board members." It was fair and balanced, presenting both sides but making clear that the HOA had overstepped. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The newspaper's website crashed from traffic. The story was picked up by regional news outlets and then by a few national websites. My phone started ringing constantly with interview requests, which I mostly declined. I did agree to do one television interview with a local station, because they promised to focus on HOA reform issues rather than the dramatic confrontation. What surprised me most was the response from other HOAs in the county. Several reached out asking if I could speak at their meetings about fire safety and reasonable governance. Some wanted to revise their rules to be more flexible and less punitive. Others wanted advice on balancing enforcement with compassion. Pine Ridge Estates itself underwent a transformation. At the next monthly meeting, a group of residents proposed amendments to the HOA bylaws. They wanted to establish an appeals process for fines, require consideration of extenuating circumstances, and limit the amount of penalties that could be assessed for minor violations. Patricia tried to block the proposals, but she no longer had support from the other board members. Ronald Martinez actually apologized publicly for his role in the aggressive enforcement policies. "I thought we were protecting property values," he said. "But we were really just making everyone miserable." The proposed amendments required a vote by the full HOA membership. Marcus helped draft the language to make sure it was legally sound. I attended the special meeting where the vote took place, not to speak, but just to show support. The amendments passed with over 80% approval. Patricia voted against them, along with Deborah Carmichael, but they were clearly in the minority. A few weeks later, right after Christmas, Patricia announced she was stepping down as HOA president. She did not give a reason, but everyone knew. Her credibility had been destroyed, and she could no longer effectively lead. Ronald Martinez was elected as the new president, with Jennifer Kim, the young woman who had been fined for parking on the street, as vice president. The new board immediately set a different tone. They sent out a newsletter apologizing for past overreach and promising a new approach focused on community building rather than punishment. They organized neighborhood events, including a winter festival and a spring cleanup day. Slowly, Pine Ridge Estates started to feel less like a prison and more like an actual community. In January, I got a visit from someone I did not expect. I was in my home office doing paperwork when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Patricia Henderson standing on my porch, looking uncomfortable and cold. "Patricia," I said, surprised. "Come in." She hesitated, then stepped inside, brushing snow off her coat. "I will not take much of your time, Henry. I just wanted to say something." We stood in my entryway, the silence stretching awkwardly between us. "I was wrong," she finally said. "About the Christmas lights, about the way I ran the HOA, about everything. I got so caught up in following rules that I forgot why the rules existed in the first place. You were right to call me out, and I am sorry." I studied her face, looking for signs of insincerity, but she seemed genuine. "I appreciate you saying that, Patricia. I know it was not easy to come here." "It was not," she admitted. "But after I stepped down, I had time to think. My husband pointed out that I had become the kind of person I used to complain about. I was so focused on control that I lost sight of what mattered. Good neighbors, community, helping each other. We all get caught up in things sometimes," I said. "The important thing is recognizing it and changing." She nodded, looking around at my Christmas decorations, which were still up. "Your lights are beautiful, by the way. My husband and I drove by on Christmas Eve, and they were the prettiest display in the neighborhood." "Thank you." My wife loved Christmas. This was for her. Patricia's expression softened. "I remember Sarah. She was always so kind. I am sorry for your loss." We talked for a few more minutes, and then Patricia left. I watched her car disappear down the street, feeling like maybe something good had come from all of this after all. People could change, situations could improve, and sometimes standing up for yourself did more than just solve your own problem. February brought new challenges. The community center fire code violations I had identified became a bigger issue than expected. During a routine inspection, a county building inspector discovered that the center's main electrical panel was severely outdated and potentially dangerous. It had to be replaced immediately, which meant the facility had to close until repairs were completed. This created a crisis for the HOA because they had several events scheduled, including a Valentine's Day dance and monthly meetings. Jennifer Kim asked if I could help expedite the permitting process, which I did. I also connected the HOA with a reliable electrical contractor who could do the work at a fair price. While the community center was closed, the HOA meetings were held at different residents' homes. This actually turned out to be a positive change because it made the meetings more informal and accessible. People felt more comfortable speaking up in someone's living room than in the formal setting of the community center. During one of these meetings at Marcus Chen's house, a resident named Stephen Wells raised an interesting point. If we are reforming the HOA, we should also look at how we are spending money. I looked at last year's budget, and we are paying a property management company $20,000 a year to basically send out violation notices and process fines. What if we use that money for actual community improvements instead? This sparked a lively discussion. It turned out that many residents had no idea how much the HOA was spending or what services they were actually receiving. The property management company was supposed to maintain common areas, coordinate repairs, and manage communications. But most of that work was actually being done by volunteers, while the management company just collected fees. Ronald Martinez agreed to investigate and report back at the next meeting. What he discovered was eye-opening. The property management contract had been signed 6 years ago by Patricia Henderson without competitive bidding. The company was owned by Patricia's brother-in-law. They were being paid for services they were not providing, and the contract had an automatic renewal clause that made it difficult to terminate. This was potentially serious. Using HOA funds to benefit a board member's family could be considered embezzlement or fraud. Marcus Chen, with his legal expertise, advised the board to consult with an attorney who specialized in HOA law. They did, and the attorney confirmed that the contract was probably illegal and definitely unethical. The board voted unanimously to terminate the contract and demand repayment of improperly paid fees. The property management company refused, so the HOA filed a lawsuit. Patricia was questioned under oath about her role in the contract. She claimed she had not known it was her brother-in-law's company, that he used a different business name. But records showed she had signed checks made out to him personally on several occasions. This put me in an awkward position. Patricia had apologized to me, and I believed she was trying to change. But she had also potentially stolen from the HOA, which meant she had stolen from every resident in Pine Ridge Estates. The amount was substantial too, possibly over $100,000 across 6 years. I talked to Marcus about it over beer one evening in his garage, which he had converted into a pretty nice man cave. "What do you think is going to happen?" I asked. "Honestly, best case scenario, she settles and pays back the money. Worst case, criminal charges. What she did meets the legal definition of embezzlement." "Does it have to go that far?" Marcus looked at me seriously. "Henry, I know you have a good heart, but Patricia did not just break HOA rules, she broke the law. If we let it slide, we are saying it is okay to steal as long as you apologize later. That is not how justice works." He was right, of course. I did not want to see Patricia go to jail, but I also could not ignore what she had done. The money she had taken was not some abstract corporate fund. It was dues paid by families, people who worked hard and trusted the HOA to manage their community responsibly. The lawsuit moved slowly through the court system, but word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some residents were furious and wanted Patricia prosecuted to the fullest extent. Others felt sorry for her and thought she had been punished enough by losing her position and reputation. The community was divided. In March, the county prosecutor's office opened a formal investigation. They subpoenaed HOA financial records going back 10 years. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Patricia had not just signed a favorable contract with her brother-in-law. She had also approved inflated invoices for work that was never done, diverted funds to personal accounts, and falsified records to cover her tracks. The total amount stolen was estimated at over $250,000. It was systematic, sophisticated fraud that had been going on since she became HOA president 8 years earlier. Deborah Carmichael was also implicated, having signed off on many of the fraudulent invoices as the board secretary. I was shocked. When I had confronted Patricia about Christmas lights, I thought I was dealing with an overzealous rule enforcer. I had no idea she was running an actual criminal enterprise. The fire code violations I had found were just the tip of the iceberg. In April, Patricia Henderson and Deborah Carmichael were arrested and charged with multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and theft. The local newspaper covered it extensively, and the story went viral again. This time, I stayed completely out of the media circus. This was not about me or Christmas lights anymore. This was about serious crimes that needed serious consequences. The trial was scheduled for September, but Patricia and Deborah both accepted plea deals in July. Patricia was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution. Deborah received 18 months and probation. Both were banned from serving on any HOA board in the future. The restitution money helped the HOA recover financially, but the emotional damage took longer to heal. Residents felt betrayed and foolish for not noticing what was happening. The new board worked hard to restore trust, implementing transparent accounting practices and regular financial audits. Through all of this, I kept doing my job as fire marshal and living my life in Pine Ridge Estates. My Christmas lights stayed up until mid-January, and no one complained. In fact, several neighbors told me they were the highlight of their holiday season. When spring arrived, I started thinking about Sarah's garden. She had loved gardening, spending hours every weekend tending to flowers and vegetables. After she died, I had let it go to weeds, unable to face the memories. But now, for the first time, I felt ready to plant again. I was in the backyard one Saturday morning, turning over soil and pulling weeds when Jennifer Kim came by. She was carrying a tray of seedlings. "I heard you were replanting," she said. "I thought you might want some tomato plants. I always grow too many." "That is really kind, Jennifer." "Thank you." She helped me plant them, and we talked about the neighborhood and how much things had changed. "You know, Henry, what you did at that HOA meeting started all of this. If you had not stood up to Patricia, we never would have discovered the fraud." "I was just trying to keep my Christmas lights up," I said. "Maybe, but you showed everyone that we did not have to accept abuse. You gave people courage to ask questions and demand accountability. That matters." Over the following weeks, more neighbors stopped by to help with the garden or just to chat. It became a community project, with different people contributing plants, advice, and labor. The garden that had been Sarah's private sanctuary became a shared space that brought people together. In June, the community center reopened after extensive renovations paid for by the restitution money. It had new electrical systems, updated fire safety equipment, and even a small library area with donated books. The HOA held a grand reopening party with food, music, and games for kids. It felt like a real celebration of community, something that had been missing for years under Patricia's authoritarian rule. Ronald Martinez gave a speech thanking everyone who had helped turn the HOA around. "We learned some hard lessons," he said. "We learned that rules without compassion become tyranny. We learned that trust without accountability leads to corruption. And we learned that when good people stand up for what is right, things can change." He looked directly at me. Henry Fletcher reminded us that we are not just homeowners following regulations. We are neighbors who should care about each other. I think that is the most important lesson of all. There was applause, and people came over to thank me again. I appreciated it, but honestly, I was ready for things to go back to normal. I had never wanted to be a neighborhood hero or a symbol of HOA reform. I just wanted to live quietly, do my job, and honor my wife's memory. But life does not always give us what we want. Sometimes it gives us what we need. I needed to be pushed out of my grief. I needed to connect with my neighbors again. I needed to remember that Sarah would want me to keep living, to keep fighting for what mattered, to keep bringing light into darkness. As summer turned to fall, Pine Ridge Estates continued to evolve. The new HOA board established committees for different aspects of community life: landscaping, social events, safety, and communications. They encouraged resident participation and actually listened to feedback. The change was remarkable. One September evening, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when Marcus came over with 2 beers. He handed me one and sat down in the other chair. "I have been thinking about December," he said. "What about it? Your Christmas lights. We should make it a neighborhood event. Everyone decorates and we have a contest with prizes. Make it festive and fun, not a source of stress and violations." I smiled. "Sarah would have loved that. Then let us do it. In her honor, we did." The first annual Pine Ridge Estates Christmas light display happened in December, almost exactly a year after my confrontation with Patricia Henderson. Over 50 homes participated, each decorated in their own unique style. The HOA provided hot chocolate and cookies, and residents walked around the neighborhood enjoying the displays. My house won second place. First place went to a family at the end of the street who had created an elaborate nativity scene with handmade wooden figures. I was not disappointed. The event was not about winning. It was about community, about celebrating together, about making our neighborhood a place of light and joy. On Christmas Eve, I stood in my driveway looking at all the lights twinkling through the neighborhood. The snow was falling softly, creating a perfect winter scene. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year, all the conflict and drama, but also all the positive changes that had come from it. I thought about Patricia, sitting in prison, paying the price for her crimes. I did not take pleasure in her situation, but I believed justice had been served. She had hurt a lot of people, and she needed to be held accountable. Maybe after she served her time, she would truly change and find a better path. I thought about all the neighbors who had become friends, the community that had formed from the ashes of corruption and abuse. We had learned to work together, to trust each other, to build something better than what existed before. Most of all, I thought about Sarah, and how she would have been so proud of the garden, of the neighborhood, of the light shining against the darkness. She always believed that one person standing up for what was right could make a difference. She was correct. As I turned to go back inside, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the new HOA president, Ronald Martinez. "Henry, just wanted to say thank you again for everything. Merry Christmas." I smiled and texted back. "Merry Christmas, Ronald. Looking forward to another good year," and I was. For the first time since Sarah's death, I was genuinely looking forward to the future. Not because I had forgotten the past or stopped missing her, but because I had remembered how to live, how to care, how to be part of something bigger than myself. The snow continued to fall as I went inside, making myself a cup of hot chocolate and settling by the fireplace. Through the window, I could see my Christmas lights, Sarah's lights really, glowing warmly in the night. They were not just decorations. They were a promise that even in the coldest, darkest times, light could still shine. That even when things seemed hopeless, standing up for what was right could change everything. I had been fined by my HOA for hanging Christmas lights in the snow. What seemed like a petty dispute became the catalyst for exposing corruption, reforming governance, and rebuilding community. All because I refused to accept unreasonable treatment and had the knowledge and authority to push back effectively. Being the county fire marshal had given me tools that most homeowners did not have. But the real power came from being willing to use those tools, to stand up, to fight back against injustice, even when it would have been easier to just pay the fine and move on. That willingness to resist, to demand better, to insist on fairness and reasonableness, that was what made the difference. As I sat there in the warm glow of the fireplace, watching the snow fall outside, I realized that this whole experience had taught me something important. Rules and regulations have their place. Order and structure matter, but they must always serve people, not the other way around. The moment rules become more important than the people they are supposed to protect, they become tools of oppression rather than instruments of justice. The HOA had forgotten that. Patricia Henderson had turned rules into weapons, using them to control and profit rather than to build and protect. And it took someone standing up to her, someone refusing to be bullied, to expose that corruption and create space for change. I was glad I had been that person, but I was even more glad that I did not have to be anymore. The neighborhood had found its voice. Residents now understood their power and their responsibility. They would not let another Patricia Henderson take control because they had learned to question authority, demand transparency, and hold leaders accountable. That was the real victory, not just reforming one HOA, but empowering people to take ownership of their community. That legacy would last far longer than any Christmas light display. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke up to find several neighbors had left gifts on my porch. Fresh baked cookies, homemade jam, a bottle of wine, and cards thanking me for what I had done. It was overwhelming in the best way possible. I spent Christmas morning delivering my own gifts, small tokens of appreciation for the people who had supported me and helped rebuild our community. When I got to Marcus Chen's house, his sister Amanda answered the door. "Henry, come in. We are just about to have breakfast. Please join us." I hesitated, but Marcus appeared behind her. "Seriously, man, come eat with us. We have way too much food." So I did. I spent Christmas morning with the Chen family, eating, laughing, and sharing stories. It felt good to be part of something again, to have people who cared, to not be alone during the holidays. As the months went by, life in Pine Ridge Estates continued to improve. The HOA focused on maintenance and community building rather than enforcement and fines. Violations still happened, of course, but they were handled with warnings and reasonable timelines for correction. The goal was compliance, not punishment. I continued my work as fire marshal, conducting inspections and enforcing codes that actually protected lives and property. But now, I approached that work with even more awareness of how enforcement could be weaponized or abused. I made sure my inspectors were trained to be educators first, helping people understand requirements and find cost-effective solutions rather than just issuing citations. My reputation in the county grew. Other fire marshals asked me to speak at conferences about balancing enforcement with community relations. I was not comfortable with the attention, but I recognized that my experience was valuable. If sharing it could help other communities avoid similar problems, then it was worth the discomfort. In the spring, I was approached by a state legislator who wanted to introduce HOA reform legislation. She had read about the Pine Ridge Estates situation and believed that stronger oversight and accountability measures were needed statewide. She asked if I would testify before a legislative committee about my experience. I agreed, and in April, I found myself in the state capitol, telling my story to a room full of politicians and policy experts. I talked about the Christmas lights, the fire code violations, and the corruption that was eventually uncovered. But I also talked about the positive changes that had happened, how empowering residents and demanding transparency had transformed our community. The legislation passed with bipartisan support. It required HOAs to establish clear appeals processes, limited the fines they could assess for minor violations, mandated annual financial audits, and created a state oversight office to investigate complaints of fraud or abuse. It was not perfect, but it was a start. When I returned home from the Capitol, neighbors threw me a surprise party at the community center. There was a banner that read, "Thank you, Henry," and tables full of food. It was embarrassing and touching at the same time. Ronald Martinez presented me with a plaque that read, "To Henry Fletcher, for reminding us that good neighbors stand up for what is right, with gratitude from the residents of Pine Ridge Estates." I gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their support and emphasizing that the real heroes were the residents who had done the hard work of rebuilding the community. "I just hung some Christmas lights," I said. "You all did everything else." But as I looked around the room at all the smiling faces, at the community that had come together and grown stronger through adversity, I knew it was more than that. Sometimes one person standing up does make a difference. Sometimes refusing to accept injustice creates space for change. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance lead to the biggest transformations. That evening after the party, I went home and walked through Sarah's garden. It was beautiful, full of spring flowers and the beginnings of vegetables that would mature over the summer. Neighbors had helped plant and tend it, making it a true community space while respecting its origins as Sarah's special place. I stood there as the sun set, feeling more at peace than I had in years. Sarah was gone, but her spirit lived on in this garden, in this neighborhood, in the values of kindness and community that she had embodied. She would have been proud of how things turned out, proud that I had stood up for what was right, proud that good had come from conflict. As darkness fell, the neighborhood lights came on, including my own Christmas lights, which I had never taken down. They stayed up year-round now, a permanent reminder of where this journey had started. Some neighbors thought it was weird to have Christmas lights in July, but most understood. They were not just decorations. They were a symbol of resistance, of community, of light shining in darkness. My story had started with an unreasonable fine and a confrontation with an abusive HOA president. It had uncovered corruption, sparked reform, and ultimately transformed an entire community. It had taken me from grief and isolation back into connection and purpose. It had reminded me that standing up for what is right, even in small things, can have ripples that extend far beyond what we can imagine. I was still the county fire marshal. I still lived in Pine Ridge Estates. I still missed Sarah every day, but I was no longer just surviving. I was living again, connected to my community, engaged with my work, hopeful about the future. And it all started because I refused to accept an $800 fine for hanging Christmas lights in the snow. Because I knew my rights and had the courage to defend them. Because I understood that sometimes you have to fight back against unreasonable authority, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. That is the power of resistance. That is the importance of accountability. That is why we cannot let bullies, whether they are HOA presidents or anyone else, go unchallenged. Every time someone stands up and says, "No, this is not right," they make it easier for the next person to do the same. As I walked back to my house that evening, I felt grateful for everything that had happened, even the difficult parts. I had been forced out of my comfort zone, pushed to confront injustice, and challenged to be part of something bigger than myself. It had been hard, sometimes painful, but ultimately transformative. The lights on my house glowed warmly as I approached, welcoming me home. Inside, the house felt less empty than it used to. Maybe because I was less empty. Maybe because I had remembered how to live, how to connect, how to care about things beyond my own pain. I made myself dinner, poured a glass of wine, and sat by the window looking out at the neighborhood. Pine Ridge Estates had become a real community, a place where people looked out for each other and worked together. It was not perfect, but it was good. It was home, and I had played a part in making it that way. Not because I was special or heroic, but because I was willing to stand up when it mattered. Because I refused to accept injustice quietly. Because I believed that things could be better and was willing to fight to make them so. That is the lesson I hope others take from my story. You do not have to accept unreasonable treatment. You do not have to let bullies win. You have power, more than you probably realize, and using it responsibly can change everything. Whether you are a fire marshal like me or just an ordinary homeowner, you have the right to question authority, demand fairness, and insist on reasonable treatment. You have the responsibility to stand up for yourself and others. You have the opportunity to make your community better. It all starts with one person, one moment, one decision to say, "No, this is not right." That is what I did when Patricia Henderson tried to fine me for Christmas lights. I said no. I pushed back. I insisted on fairness. And that one moment of resistance started a chain reaction that transformed everything. As I finished my wine and prepared for bed, I thought about the coming year. The second annual Christmas light display would be even bigger. The garden would produce vegetables that we would share at neighborhood potlucks. The HOA would continue finding new ways to build community and serve residents. And I would continue doing my job, enforcing codes that mattered, protecting public safety, and treating people with the respect and compassion they deserved. I would remember the lessons learned from this experience and carry them forward in everything I did. The story that started with a petty fine had become something much bigger. A story about justice, community, and the power of standing up for what is right. It was a story I would tell for years to come, not to glorify myself, but to inspire others to find their own courage, to resist their own injustices, to transform their own communities. Because that is how change happens. Not through grand gestures or dramatic revolutions, but through ordinary people making the choice to stand up, speak out, and insist on better. One person at a time, one moment at a time, one act of courage at a time. That is the real story of how my HOA fined me for Christmas lights in snow and froze when I revealed I was the county fire marshal. It is not really about Christmas lights or fire codes or even HOA corruption. It is about the power we all have to create change, if only we are brave enough to use it. And that is a power worth celebrating, protecting, and passing on to future generations. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt truly content for the first time in years. Sarah would have been proud, not just of what I had accomplished, but of who I had become through the process. I had found my way back to living, back to caring, back to being part of something that mattered. And that was the greatest gift of all.